I even think like the conclusions, I don't know, like I understand what you're saying, but I don't know that that answers hardcore like what you're saying. Like I think there's multiple factors that bear into that. But I definitely think the one thing that's been experienced through teachers that have gone through the process is that their eyes and their lens are opened to things that they maybe didn't recognize before, and they are approaching the work with a level of sensitivity based upon that understanding through experiencing in those classes. But I think it's a hard thing. I definitely think we can get the data, but I don't know that you can make those types of conclusions that it's 100% because of this. I think it's a multitude of factors that actually weigh in. And I don't know, Scott.
I thought I heard someone say data, so I thought it proper that I pop up. We're actually working quite close with the evaluation firm out of Minnesota who is helping to evaluate the effectiveness of Terra Luna. Currently, their evaluative efforts is a developmental type evaluation, so it's really looking at kind of impact on those teachers, because before a student can really feel an impact, first a teacher must be moved, and when that teacher is moved, they start to really look in a very intense way at every action they perform in the classroom. And so what we see is behavior change starting to evolve and manifest itself in the classroom. After a number of iterations of that behavior change, the students start to take note of that. And as students do, wonder if it's a pattern or if this is a change, you know, and they test it out. So that evaluation that we're supporting by Terra Luna is really at that stage, looking at this impact as it is occurring to teachers and helping Minnesota Humanities and other Sharif's work in expanding the offering from Minnesota Humanities to ensure that they're able to go deep enough with those who are willing and able to do this work and to get this professional development so that it does start manifesting itself in the classroom and those behaviors that students recognize as not only occurring but genuine. So that data is forthcoming, and we are assisting in that evaluation.
So there's data coming, right?
Correct. It is being evaluated. We are assisting in that evaluation, and data is coming. And in fact, papers are being written now, kind of informing that qualitative work. Are you just saying this just to get me to shut up on that?
No.
It's a great question, and it's one that we're taking very seriously.
The reason why I bring this up, and I probably might sound like a broken record, Mr. Raleigh, I might put you on a spot. How large is your budget?
Discretionary budget, $20,000.
That's what I'm saying. So, like, if it's not effective, how can we as a district or as a board, if we're sitting there and work with the superintendent, or if the superintendent's already moving that needle, I understand it's a workshop, to really make sure that he's effective if he's not reaching that. But are you going to follow up on that? Because I have one more question. But go ahead.
I can wait.
No, go ahead.
Just a couple of notes. First, I'll go back to Dr. Chisholm's comment. As we look at, for example, Wakanda's data, obviously we've seen improvement in student achievement. We're going to see improvement in the behavior side of it. And Minnesota Humanities plays a role in that, but CHAMPS played a role in that. What you're doing with technology, which creates engagement, played a role in that. Now we're adding a CLC component for additional after-school tutorial. It's always, and you're not the only one that asked that question, Mr. Snow. I have other folks in the community. Tell me the one thing that brought about that improvement. And there isn't a one thing. There's never a one thing. And if I could have one thing the media understood, because that's where I get the question most often, tell me the one thing. And the one thing is that it's a multiplicity of efforts with a clear outcome in mind, which is your data that says we're going to demonstrate student success in student achievement, student behaviors, all of that wrapped in a climate and culture that we measure as well, and we show growth. And we're better tomorrow than we were today. But it's not one thing. The success that Wakanda's having, and I would really, really love to have the board members who are interested in this topic go visit the school. You got to see the school, the kids. Now, we're out now, except we've got summer programs, but it's a lot different in the summer. But it's never one thing, and I know everybody always looks for that. And just to kind of tie in as far as budgets and all of those pieces, Minnesota Humanities is $3.3 million underneath Mr. LaRue. So he has a $3.3 million facilities programmatic and facilitation effort that's $3.3 million. So I don't know if that's exactly what you mean or not, but the actual efforts that go into some of this work are pretty expensive. But that's a foundational support piece that we facilitate through that.
I understand, but that's a package, so it's not like you can cut. But all right, so my next question. and I'll end on this. Dr. Kerberg, she's still here? She left? Oh, is she here? Can I just have a couple questions? Trying to think of the term you used for the school support staff that is going in there. Same thing with your outcomes of your supervisors that are in schools. Same thing here. I see a lot of things that are going, but this has been going on for a while, and it's good, but I just want to know how effective are they, and is there data to show that they currently are effective in their current state? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Are they really effective in that? And the reason why I say that is like walking line in line with principals, me just hearing in the community, and just talking to some principals, they're like, hey, my discretionary funding's cut, I'm having all the stress. It feels like when tax shows up, they're watching me to mess up. And I mean, how do you, that's the thing. So you can have a lot of these supervisors, but if it's not something that you would say kind of like the superintendent, a culture change, then you have someone that's coming in, even though they don't have the intention, that principal still feels that this person's going to run and tell TAC, and now they have a supervisor and an ED and a Minnesota Humanities and a PLAWS assistant and all these other people watching them, and it's not really effective in the classroom, really trying to help Timmy read. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I just made Timmy up.
Well, I think the question is, how do we assure principals we're working with them and not doing things to them? How can we make them feel comfortable and confident about their support?
Yes, and show that the people that are doing it are effective.
And showing that, well, let me answer the first. There was a phrasing you heard mentioned by one of my colleagues, and it was the term thought partners, intentionally letting our staff know we're here to coach and support as opposed to evaluate. And that's a huge difference in terms of how you're viewed when you go into the building. So I think that's key. The other thing we know from the body of evidence about what impacts teacher change in using best practices, it's when you receive specific coaching in the classroom that allows you to understand what you did correctly or incorrectly and then how to improve it. And it's done in a way that you have trust developed and relationship developed so that you can get better at your craft. And it has to happen that connectedly. And then in terms of our staff worth the investment of dollars we put into them, we have to hold them to high standards. We have calendars we review. We have annual assessments, appraisals that we do. Our supervisor's not appraised every 3 years. They're appraised every year, and that's a new standard we actually have for all administrators that we're doing in this district. So we have rubrics that we talk about, mid-year goals. We have strategic planning, goal checkups. So, yeah, we have to watch the data to make sure we're getting the outcomes we want.
And I brought up two pieces there, and my main concern point was these programs or these positions were already in existence before this REACH was created, correct? So what are they going to do differently to support to move that needle? That's what I wanted to hear.
With all due respect,
and I'm done.
They won't have the curricular responsibilities any longer. They won't be doing curriculum development projects, district-wide trainings. They won't be in charge of the district-wide grants, district-wide professional development for all schools. Instead, and I'd like to defer to Dr. Chisholm, they'll be working specifically with these targeted schools. It used to be 50% of their job was on district-wide efforts and initiatives. 100% focus is on these schools.
And my voice got kind of deep for a second. One of the things I was going to add too is that this REACH supervisor is now their curriculum. So they don't have a curriculum person plus their REACH supervisor. Their REACH supervisor is that role. And one of the things that we did with the principals around the role of the REACH supervisor is we talked about what are they and what are they not. And we specifically did that with the supervisors as well with the principals, and we did it at separate times. But the interesting thing was when we pulled together, they were in alignment with what their thinking was. Because what we wanted to do was make sure that the principals were comfortable with the supervisor role that was coming in, but that everybody understood what's the expectation. But one of the things that came up in our last meeting that principals were actually excited about was that more time intensive support when you're talking about 60 to 75% of your time having that person in your building. But the other thing that was a priority for the principals during that discussion was a developer also of our capacity. So they actually saw this role as a value to give them information that maybe they don't always have access to also help with their development and working with their staff. And also helping develop their teachers as well. But we went through this process because of what you mentioned, is we want to make sure, even after that, we had an opportunity for the supervisors and the principals to meet and talk. But we realized that this is a process. But what we're trying to do by our efforts and our actions is show the principals that we're committed to doing things a little bit differently. So I do feel that we've accomplished parts of that, but obviously we have to keep working at developing that relationship to continue to develop that trust in the right way.
If I could just add to that, that is a concern always, and I think you've probably heard that from me, Mr. Snow, that we are adding things to the principal plate, and I am concerned about that, and I don't want them to feel like we're doing things to you instead of with you. That's critical. It's critical, and we are moving so fast with whether it's requiring Minnesota Humanities or moving with additional requirements of behavioral MTSSB and other things. It is a challenge, and trying to weigh and balance that is a huge issue. So you've brought up a very valid concern and thought that we talk a lot about. Yeah. That we want to make sure we're giving supports that are working with them and helping them, which is why.
And I forgot to mention they only have 3 schools versus 6 or 7 that they had last year.
But they're there to help them, and that's what we've said. You are not there to layer a burden on the principal. You're there to help the principal with his or her burden. And if they're not doing that, then shame on us. But I think they are. I think we'd know it. I mean, we heard just earlier Lisa say that J.B. Dacko said he really feels like he's finally getting support. He wanted the extra staff there. He didn't look at it as a burden. So I'm hoping that's where we're getting. So it's a bit of a concern if you've heard otherwise, and I'd certainly like to help with that. If you ever want to share with me, I'm more than happy to intervene, because that's not the kind of feeling we want. We want the feeling of we're trying to help you, not to hinder you.
Okay, does anyone else have questions or comments for any of the EDs or anyone else? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all so much for being here, for giving us the presentation, and for the great work that is taking place. And we are excited to hear next year about even more great work. And truly, that's why we wanted this to be part of the workshop. I know Mr. Evans has had a lot of questions from board members about what are we doing with those schools that are struggling, and so we wanted to spend an evening talking about that. Okay, Mr. Vargas.
Sorry, hi, yes. So this is the presentation for Wakanda. The RIT scores, one, thank you very much for including the MAP scores there. That's, quite frankly, that's the type of the information that I really think is most helpful when we're talking about, it's the collaboration between the culture change and the shift that the mindset that you're trying to implement, but then also what's the quantitative impact that we are seeing. And MAP was a huge initiative that we pushed through. I know that was something that our departments were rallying behind. How are we, because on that graph it doesn't show the grade levels that the RIT scores are aligned to. So in what ways are you engaging the parents on what the RIT scores mean in terms of grade levels, on whether or not my child is actually on grade level and where they actually started and where they ended? What are those conversations looking like? What's the plan for that?
Absolutely, it's a great question, and we only showed you just a little glimpse, but we do have the data from the research department that shows we can actually break it down to an actual individual student, and we do share this information with parents at conferences, and they're able to see, we have goal setting sheets for every student, so it's where they started at the beginning of the year, They know every time, so in winter and spring, where they need to be. And the teachers actually go over that before the students ever go and take their assessment. This is where you were last time. This is what you need to do to make your goal. I also come around with Prize Patrol as well to celebrate student success, because we want to celebrate that. But we do have it where we can actually break it down to not just a grade level, but also to every individual student.
That's great. I bring it up because I'm particularly, when we talk about the end game is going to be student achievement, but one of the indicators of that is when our parents are being able to speak in an honest way about where their child is and where they need to be, and being able to make meaning out of that is really difficult, and that happens through the small, honest conversations of transparency on where our kids are. That's why we talked about MAP, and that's the whole reason why we talked about it. That's very vividly remember that. And that's a practice I know we're pushing in a lot of our schools, but it's even more important when we're talking about our kids being farther behind.
Sure. And one of the things I forgot to mention, even at conferences, after the teachers shared the data with the parents, we actually had them do a reflection of the parents. So the parents did a reflection of their student and how they felt like they were doing in school and where they felt like they were and it was very eye-opening. I took all the data back from the parents, from their reflection, and it was really eye-opening, I think, to them to see, okay, well, my child does struggle in reading or is doing very well in math, and so it was powerful to them. So we did do that process at conferences as well.
Yeah, and I call this out because when we're looking at the data that we have at the federal level from the consistent school turnarounds efforts that have been happening across the country, and the ones that have had incremental progress versus, huge amounts of progress, it has been more dependent on how are we empowering our parents and students to have the knowledge on where their children are and where they need to be. So I'm excited that you're doing that, because that's impressive. We're doing that in year one, and that we're not making. And because even if you look at the 6th grade scores, I'm trying to remember. I believe even the growth we're still below grade level, right?
That's correct.
And we don't want to demean our parents and make them feel like we are not. Progress isn't good. Progress is amazing, but there's also such a beauty in knowing where we are. So. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing that we're behind grade level. At least we know, and we can talk about it meaningfully in 5th and 6th grade, because there are parents I know that don't know that. When they don't know that, that's when we have 11th grade and our kids aren't proficient, and our parents are surprised. And that's the culture change. So thank you for putting that in the presentation, and for executive directors supporting that kind of conversations. That's the culture change that I want to see, and I'm happy to see it in this.
And one of the other things, if you do come out to Wakanda, we are very transparent. Our instructional data coach actually has a bulletin board where we display all of the data, so anybody that walks in our building can see exactly where we are, because we do want to move that work forward.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Oh,
A question.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Okay,
Wayne.
when I was there, when I toured there and visited there, I saw a lot of less seasoned newer teachers. What's the staffing going into next year? What's the turnover there?
It's the same. We only lost 2 teachers. One was moving to Florida to get married, and another moved to Virginia to join her husband. So everybody else is remaining.
Awesome. That speaks volumes right there. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for the presentations this evening, and I'm going to let the record reflect that the workshop adjourned at 9:25 p.m.